Kenny, how are you, sir?
Roberto, I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Always, always. Let's start with who you are and what you do, if you don't mind. Talk a little bit about yourself and the current role you're in.
Sure. Kenny Burgos. So I'm a former state lawmaker representing the Southeast Bronx in the Assembly for 2 terms. I worked in city council and government prior to that. I currently head the New York Apartment Association, which is a recent real estate organization, a merger between two long-standing ones that represent rent stabilized owners throughout the city of New York. We currently represent several thousand owners, which also represent close to 500,000 apartments throughout the entire city. But speak for, I like to say, the entire rent stabilized industry, of which is 1 million apartments here in the city.
Kenny, let's start with some I mean, there's a lot I want to ask you. There's a lot to unpack. And this is a big this is such a wide issue, housing, and arguably the most important, right, concern of most city residents is rent, right? The
Yep.
rent is too damn high. But Ken, I want to start with the referendums, right? There are three proposals, depending on how you interpret it. One side says there's obstruction, we got to get rid of the sort of layers and barriers that prevent us from building more affordable housing. And there's one side that says the city council is an oversight, checks and balances, co-branch of government to the New York City mayor. Members, no one knows the district better than the current member, hence member deference on the land use, right? Now, you represented the South Bronx in the state assembly. You worked with the land use chair, Rafael Salamanca, and you worked with the majority leader. Now, you understand as a member, right? You had NYCHA. I remember having conversations with you about NYCHA and your constituents. How do you feel about that? I mean, one side, I know that you're a big proponent of building, and that's how you lower the cost on small landlords, right? That's how you create more affordable housing, not with rent freezes and other things. Currently, how do you feel about the proposal? And explain your interpretation of what this does and doesn't do for the layperson that's not in the weeds like we are.
Sure. Thank you. So first, I'll say for the listeners, right? I think it's important to clear up that we are not a development organization. Most, if not all, of my members and owners are not developers, but I do envision this organization as one that should speak to good housing policy, whether or not it impacts our owners. And to me, the most important housing policy to provide affordability, to provide quality housing, and to fix the crisis that has plagued New York City for close to 50 years is building housing. I mean, it's almost that simple, which is why you'll see me very often advocate for simply build, 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 because that's what we're not doing. Now, the referendums that you referenced, we have fully endorsed. I think these are referendums in the right direction. I think these are a way for the typical New York City voter to vote for that very affordable housing that they so desire. And it's a rare occurrence when this can happen, where we can vote in opportunities to streamline projects in a way that we've seen in other cities and other states, and even in our neighbor here in New Rochelle, just above us in New York City, where they've been able to streamline their development process, their land use process, and get housing off the ground. And they have a proven model of showing that when you build that housing to the scale that's needed, you can actually keep rents at bay, if not lower them. So to the layperson, without going into each of the 4 referendums, I'll say is like, this is an opportunity to bring that housing that is often stalled at local government. And being a former politician, I get it. I understand that, right now council members utilize the land use process and the ULURP process as an opportunity to negotiate and try to get the most they can for the constituents. And I'm not, an advocate to diminish, the voice of the people and those local communities. But what this process has become a large obstacle for the housing that we need. And we've seen it time and time again. And if we don't get housing built at a level none of us who are alive today have ever seen, we will continue to be faced with this housing crisis that I believe is the crisis of our generation, that, as you perfectly stated, is one that, if you poll, is the number one, if not number two issue to almost every single New Yorker. So we have to remove the friction and the obstacles to getting this housing off the ground. And I believe these 4 referendums do just that.
For example, there was a hearing today on Just Home, a project in your home borough. that the council approved. And my understanding is that the mayor is now opposed to the project. And the city council saying, see, this is an example of us wanting to build, and it's the mayor now the impediment to the building, whether it be for political reasons, whether it be for re-election, we don't know that, right? The optics, it looks that way.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? Because again, it's always a pro, it's always a, again, you're saying that rightfully so, the council member arguably says, look, I know my community, I'm going to try to get as much affordable, or I'm trying to get as much concessions, whether it be community benefits agreement for my community. But there's also a co-branch, right? There's also a negotiation where if a mayor or an executive wants something built, I mean, that's the history of democracy, right? From Obamacare, to sort of working with people, there has to be Lulu's, chits, whatever you call it, to entice someone to bend, whether you agree or not, right? And sort of the argument can be made, yes, we need more housing. No one can debate or dispute or refute that. But this is an example of where if you give too much power to one side, then you could sort of set things off balance, right? But we can leave that up for debate unless you have a counter to what I'm saying.
I don't have a counter. I'll just add to it and say, in politics and in government, there's never any shortage of finger pointing, and that's what we're seeing right now. But this is exactly what these referendums hope to get rid of, right? When you put the power back in the people's hand, the people say, hey, if a project is, has a high level of affordability, it should be streamlined. We should be cutting the red tape to get these projects off the ground. It removes the opportunity for finger pointing for a council member or for a mayor or for an advocacy group or for anyone to say, the reason why this project is not happening is because of this one. The reason why the rent is so high is because of property owners, right? But if we can actually focus on the solution at hand that most experts agree with, then the finger pointing hopefully comes to an end.
Kenny, I want to play devil's advocate with you because you're saying build, baby, build, and you're saying small landlords, right? If you do a rent freeze, right, they can't essentially make up for the cost of heating oil, of maintenance on a building. You highlight how certain renovations can't happen because they're making maybe nickels or maybe not making a profit at all, just breaking even, which will not allow them to do certain things. But if we build more affordable housing, if that's the solution, how do we deal with the AMI problem? Because there are people that argue, you can build and build and build, but HUD, has this AMI that sort of includes the suburbs, right? And I've heard it before. Mm-hmm. I go in the daily news, I look at these apartments, at these lotteries, family of 3 makes X amount of money. You and I both know that in a lot of our communities, that number is totally inflated. So how do you deal with that issue if you're building more affordable housing? What constitutes affordable?
So I'm going to say something that may come up a little inflammatory, but allow me time to explain it, right? I think the AMI conversation is a distraction. And it's not to say that, the affordability problem of a family who is making under a certain amount is not very real, but this is why I say it's a distraction. When we say let's build affordable housing, well, first and foremost, what people have to understand that I try to get across is affordable housing means subsidized housing, right? Because if you decide to build housing tomorrow, the wood, the labor, the ground, the architecture, the permits, don't care who you're building it for, it's going to have a cost. So if you want that housing to come in at a certain number for rent, it's going to require either a tax credit or a direct subsidy. So affordable housing is always subsidized housing. That's just the facts here, right? But your question is, how do we get that number down for people to actually afford it? And this is what I constantly push, is to bring the cost of housing down, right? Why do we accept that it is just the most expensive place in the country and in the world to build housing here in New York City? And that directly translates to your rent, because much like any business, if I open up a restaurant tomorrow, or let's say a bodega, and it costs me $10,000 in rent, and it costs me X amount of dollars to fill the shelves, and it costs me $30 an hour in labor, I have to sell my product to reflect the costs to operate this business. Now, the difference is when it comes to when people can't afford their food, what the government does is give people what's called SNAP. They don't tell The bodegas in the supermarket say, hey, lower the price of your eggs, lower the price of your bacon, egg, and cheese, lower the price of your steak. They say, you can't afford a necessary product, which is food. We are going to give you this card to help you feed yourself and your family because we understand what it costs for food to sell. When it comes to housing, for some reason, the conversation always gets a little bit corrupted, right? We do have a voucher system, which we advocate for, and I think is a
Section 8 vouchers. What about those vouchers? No?
yeah. What about those? What? I'm sorry.
No. We're saying we do something similar to SNAP with housing. It's Section 8.
Correct. But you know what you don't do for rent stabilized housing, which is already regulated housing that has all the expenses of regular housing? An owner cannot collect the entirety of Section 8. If the legal rent on a unit is $1,200, the city interprets the law where that Section 8 voucher can only be collected up to $1,200, and the same for a city theft voucher. So why do we allow owners that need the revenue to account for the property taxes, the insurance, the labor, the fuel, the water, all of which comes with no discount, all of which is not subsidized for affordable housing? The only thing that is regulated is the cost. Why don't we allow owners to collect the entirety of that voucher? But again, back to the main point, if you want the housing to be affordable beyond the voucher problem we have to fix, you have to reduce the cost of housing. If I could build an apartment building tomorrow where it costs half the amount it costs today based on whatever regulations and laws that have been put in place that inflate these costs, I can charge rent that is lower. But if we don't address that, to me, the AMI question is a distraction.
But if you were a former legislator, Kenny, you were in the assembly, right? You legislated, you passed laws, you had conversations, you sort of negotiated bills. Why don't you have that conversation, understanding that you represented the Bronx, right? You worked for the Democratic Party of the Bronx, the leadership in Albany, Speaker Hastie's from the Bronx. People can say, Kenny, you can say, well, why don't you legislate this? Or why aren't you pushing Albany to legislate this, to make these changes?
I talk about this every day of my life, Roberto, and I've been talking about this even before taking this role, contrary to some people's beliefs. I carried a bill in the assembly to help bring back the 50,000 plus units that are offline right now due to the rent stabilization laws, because these units are sitting offline because the math doesn't make sense. This is a math equation, and all of my advocacy from then until now is always centered around affordability. I am a lifelong New Yorker. I grew up in the Bronx. Every day when I was a state lawmaker, 8 to 9 out of 10 of people who walked in my office had a problem with housing, and I saw that very clearly. But I also recognize that I can placate them and just give them, feel-good talking points, or I can try to solve this problem. And I do this still today to try to solve this housing problem. And we do that by bringing more housing, whether it's through new development, and trying to reduce the cost of building that housing, operating that housing, which will reduce the cost of rent that it translates to, and also bringing units back online from rent stabilization that have fallen offline due to poor policy. That is the goal here. The goal is affordable housing. I just have a different vision and path on how we get there than most people, I guess.
Kenny, you have a political action, right? A POC, right? And you've utilized it, right, to sort of give funding and give resources to candidates you believe share your vision on housing, and against people that oppose your vision on housing. Why not use the same resources, right, to lobby the state to get to where you want to go? For example, there was $2.5 million that your organization contributed to former Governor Cuomo's campaign, right?
Well, not to his campaign, it was a super PAC. I just want to be clear for the record. I just want to be clear for the record. Okay.
It's an IE. I get it. No, but it's an important point of clarification, Kenny. Some people can make the argument, say, well, that 2.5 million should have went to the small landlords to rehabilitate the units that are offline, that they're saying they can't rehabilitate because they don't have money. Apparently, there's some money. Obviously, 2.5, I don't think is nearly enough. But again, this is the lay person that
I get it. And
landlord voices that are saying it's just the rich getting richer, right? Because that's how it's interpreted, whether you agree with it or not, right?
And it's a good point,
right?
Let me bring some clarity to that, right? So one, the $2.5 million is part of our organization, right? Not a singular property owner that cut this check. And this organization, as I said, was a merger of two organizations that have been around since 1974, and we're blessed to have a decent amount of reserves for political actions. Secondly, while you're right, $2.5 million would not be nearly enough to get this done. The issue is not just that a property owner doesn't have the direct capital right now to renovate a property. It is the policy that ensues. Unlocking Doors is a great example. The city has put out a program called Unlocking Doors. Their first proposal was to put $25,000 as a reimbursable grant to help bring these units back online. Nobody took the money. Then they put up to $50,000. Two people tried, pulled back their application. Nobody took the money, because it's not just that you simply need 50,000. Because if I can give a quick explanation of this program, the city said, we'll give you $50,000 reimbursed, and we all know how reimbursements work with the city. That's a guessing game at best. $50,000, renovate this apartment. The apartment has to be under $1,200 for a one bedroom or $1,400 for a three bedroom, and you must take a city FEPS voucher. These apartments cost $1,200 to operate on average for a one bedroom. So you're telling, and they cost a lot more than $50,000 to renovate. Right now, NYCHA is spending $465,000 per apartment to do the renovations in similar apartments that we have. So you want owners to spend more than what it costs to renovate. They'll lose money there. Then take in a voucher holder that's going to pay just at, if not below, the cost to operate this unit as costs continue to inflate, as the contending mayoral candidate threatens to freeze the rent as other costs go up. This is a deal to essentially lose money in perpetuity. So it's not as simple as saying, hey, here's 50 or 100,000, renovate the apartment and rent it back out. There's a lot more that goes into these policies that have to make it work. And it shows itself through unlocking doors, because otherwise, why wouldn't anyone take it?
What's your posture on Airbnb, Kenny?
What's my what? I'm sorry?
Position on Airbnb. The argument that if smaller landlords, right, had the opportunity to sort of whatever the fees are, whatever the cost of doing business at Airbnb, right? What are your thoughts on that? And the only reason I'm talking about creative ways to figure it out.
Understanding. Well, I mean, we don't spend too much time really diving into this policy, because for rent stabilized owners, they operate almost under an entirely different set of regulations and rules, and it's just not the pathway for them. It's not that we're inherently against Airbnb. I think I think a property owner individually should be allowed to use their property and make an income as they see fit, so long as it fits within the laws of the city and state. But for our issue, I mean, we're focused on these units falling offline. We're focused on these units are falling into distress. And, Airbnb, if it comes tomorrow, I don't think is going to be the saving grace for rent stabilized owners.
Penny, I have another question. Were you a student in Bronx High School of Science?
Yes.
At the same time as the Democratic nominee for mayor, Zoran Memdani?
Yes, we were.
Did you know each other?
I didn't know. No, honestly, we didn't know each other well in high school. He was 2 years older than me. We more connected. We were elected together in 2020.
I know. You served together.
Yeah, but I'm saying, but in high school we weren't.
Yeah. But I'm saying there is sort of a interconnectedness with you.
Parallel track, if you will, right? Yeah, beyond that stops at the assembly.
But here's the question I have: as someone who had to negotiate bills, who worked in Albany, who had to sometimes take a half a loaf. I saw something today where Jim Whalen, the head of revenue, says, "Look, we're going to work with the Democratic nominee, with Zoran Memdani. We got to work with the man." Why have you all taken what seems to be right now, as it looks, right? Anything is possible. The likelihood that he's going to be the mayor of New York City is almost right. I mean, he's in a good place. Why take such an adversarial position, fully understanding, Kenny, that politics, there is a lot of negotiating, there is a lot of deal making. Why take the posture, for example, I know that you sort of highlighted the rent freeze and how that impacts certain landlords and how it's not as vanilla or as straightforward as it's been sort of presented. Why take that posture where you fully understand that at some point, and knowing what you know, Kenny, you're a smart man, I know you well, and you're a reasonable man. Why take the posture of party or no, we're going to go hard?
I wouldn't categorize as adversarial, right? We had $2.5 million against him pre-primary, but I'm quoted pretty quickly after the June primary that everyone else was sort of living out the 5 stages of grief, and I was already at the end of that road, which was acceptance, right? I'd accepted by June that Zoran was likely to be the next mayor. We have communicated both pre and post primary. I had my own personal relationship with him. I wouldn't categorize any of my talking points as adversarial. In fact, they've been more flattering to him as an individual and as a candidate. But I think both things can be true, where I can agree he'll be mayor. I can credit his campaign and his just ability as a candidate and still criticize his policy as poor policy, because that's what it is. And I can back that up with data and facts all day. So I think both those things can be true, and we surely will have to work with him, and will work with him should he become mayor of New York City, because the fact is, one, he'd be the executive for the city in which we operate, but two, he can't ignore us when his premier campaign promise is a direct threat against our industry. And when I represent families and owners whose mothers and fathers and grandfathers and great grandfathers built this up, and this is their livelihood, and they do this with honor and respect in providing a service to the city of New York through housing, and they do it with dignity, and are being threatened as if they're villains and to lose everything they have, then I have no other choice but to point out how bad of a policy a rent freeze is. And I will do that to no end.
Post primary, how many conversations have you had with the Democratic nominee post primary?
You want me to give you on my call log? I mean, we talked.
Okay, good. So there is engagement. There's a back and forth happening.
Yeah.
Got it. Kenny, the other thing is, how would you rate this Mayor Adams, in terms of housing, building, city a yes? Obviously, these proposals that will be put up for a vote, how would you rate him in terms of housing? I know that he's publicly said, I built more affordable housing than both Bloomberg and de Blasio combined. What would be your letter grade if you were to give one to current Mayor Adams?
Well, I'm public on this, where we've credited.
Well,
I'm public with this, where I think the Adams administration and Mayor Adams should be credited with the City of Yes, which is one of the most sweeping pro-housing legislation the city has seen, since the zoning changes in '61. So I think they should and deserve that credit. It'll be seen in some years, but it can't be understated the impact that will have in this city. And I think he has been forthcoming in trying to bring new housing, despite the obstacles that exist both in local government and city council and beyond. To give a lot of grade is difficult, because when it comes to my issue and the people I represent, again, we sort of exist within the real estate industry as a subcategory, and quite frankly, whether through fault of City Hall, but mostly of the state legislature, I mean, these buildings are failing. Our owners are failing. So I can give them credit for being pro housing and building it. But when it comes to rent stabilization,
is that an accurate number, or you don't have that data that he's built more affordable housing than Bloomberg and de Blasio?
So I don't have anything to push back on it, but you know this. Every mayor, when they say they built housing, it captures built, planned, or preserve, and planned is really a projection through zoning changes. So he's able to project a lot of housing based on City of Yes. Built is always the smallest number. I mean, that's typically right through 421A or whatever tax credits that they've given to build. And then preserve, quite honestly, is just saving failing rent stabilized buildings through Article 11s or HDFCs. So those numbers can always sort of be regurgitated through every single mayor if that building continues to fail. So I take those numbers with a grain of salt no matter what.
Got it.
To me, the policy is what matters most.
Kenny, property taxes.
Oh man, let's go.
I mean, there's been reviews, there's been studies. It's across the board. I mean, people have used it as part of their mayoral platform, property tax reform, Why doesn't it happen? Going back to you, former legislator, I know elected officials who said, I'm going to take this on. I'm going to make this happen. I'm the person. Former Mayor de Blasio, again, did a sort of review or report on sort of property tax reform. Why doesn't it happen?
Elected officials do not like picking winners and losers, and that's what property tax reform would require. And mayors, no mayor is going to decrease the share of revenue that they get to utilize as a New York City budget. And the lion's share of the New York City budget, $100 billion plus, whatever it is today, comes from property taxes. Everyone knows it's backwards. It's been broken for 40 years. The rent stabilized class 2 buildings are cross subsidized with condos and co-ops, and they pay the highest share of property taxes, while 421A buildings that are brand new get 35 years of $0 property taxes. And it conflates our issue many times, because those buildings tend to have much higher rents. Those are the ones people see on the affordable housing website that are $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month. And they're also rent stabilized. But then people believe that is the entire image of rent stabilization, whereas the owners I represented pre-1974 rent stabilization, the median rent is $1,500. And people are mind blown when they hear that and they can't believe it, because that literally means 500,000 apartments in New York City rent below $1,500. And that is a fact. This is from the Rent Guidelines Board themselves, from City Hall. But these units will never come online, because who would give those deals up? They will stay in those apartments because it's a sweetheart deal. And the flip side of that coin is the market rate rent, which continues to climb because we're not building enough housing and people are fighting over the crumbs of housing that is left. But again, all of this comes back to property taxes. We would have a much healthier housing market if we were to make our property taxes equitable, if we were to reduce our property taxes. I mean, right now, our owners are spending pretty much 30% of all revenue directly to property taxes.
And what you're telling me is we're going to be talking about this till we're blue in the face, and there is no solution.
I hope not. I mean, again, this has been a conversation for the past, I think, 3 mayors. But I truly believe we're hitting a crossroads where this can no longer be the proverbial can kicked down the road. Because of the distress happening in rent stabilized housing. I mean, the NYU Furman Center has already testified that 200,000 apartments are functionally bankrupt. And let's put that out for scale. NYCHA currently has 174,000 apartments within its portfolio that we all recognize is underfunded, deferred maintenance, and needs $80 billion in capital to save. So you now have 200,000 units of rent stabilized housing, of which has all the expenses and more of NYCHA, because NYCHA doesn't pay property taxes. These owners do, but is capped at revenue, can't collect the full voucher amount, and has a median rent of $1,500. I continue to say this is a math problem, and this math problem isn't looking very good when you now have 400,000 apartments in the city of New York that are failing and will continue to climb. So we have a big problem on our hands. So property tax is going to have to get addressed sooner rather than later.
Kenny, if you had a crystal ball, give me 3 policy changes in New York City. Obviously, mayor, city council, whatever that iteration looks like, post this referendum. 3 policy changes that will automatically be automatic game changers in terms of solving the age-old problem of affordable housing.
Reform property taxes to an equitable manner where rent stabilized housing is not the most overtaxed housing in this city. Vacancy control problem, which came in 2019 due to rent laws, which has put 50,000 apartments offline and continues to climb, and is destroying housing to the point where it's defunded and selling for less than a new car right now per unit. And the third one will be housing court, where right now I think housing court is failing both property owners and tenants alike, where tenants, who maybe are in need and need a voucher or need a one-shot deal, are forced to go through this arduous process for months or years on end just to try and get help from the city. And owners go those years and months without any payment, and the housing falls apart. So we can fix the bottleneck in housing court. We can help tenants who are in need and get the much needed revenue to these buildings. So those are my 3.
State. Three things at the state level.
Well, property taxes would have to begin at the state. Housing court is the state, and vacancy is the state. So I'm sorry, was the first question for the city? Maybe I missed that part.
Yeah, but that's fine. I mean, we get it. The 2 are intertwined.
Yeah.
Now, Kenny, talk about what members, right, in terms of your conversations, in terms of your dialogues, get it. Talk about some folks that you consider reasonable in this conversation that sort of get the larger problem that you're trying to sort of articulate and that you're fighting for. Talk about some champions that you have in the council and at the state that you could say legitimately are willing to hearing both sides of the argument and try to find a middle ground between the landlord and the tenant.
No, me a pillow talk here, man, on your podcast. I will give you the answer and say I think there is.
You have a POC and there are members that you consider friends or pro cause, right? So that sort of says a lot.
We certainly do, but unfortunately, by just the nature of politics today, and unfortunately, the category in which my industry is in, I would never want to harm friends and put them in certain positions. But there is certainly a growing chorus of elected officials who I think recognize, one, the conversation that I'm trying to inject in the political arena, right? Not one, I tell everyone, our goal here is not to just keep cranking rent up and raise the rent on grandma. I'm a former elected. I know what goes on. I still live in my neighborhood. I want to help people, but I'm trying to achieve affordability, but I'm just having the real conversation about these numbers. So I think we have more and more electeds who recognize that, one, this is what I'm trying to do, but 2, are also recognizing that these astronomical costs are not just hitting, the tenants, they're hitting the property owners, and it's reflecting the tenant experience.
So none, you don't want, it's fine if you don't want to name names. None stand out. You just want to keep it as a sort of broad strokes.
I wish it was a bigger group. I'll say that.
Okay, got it. Now here's the other, in terms of rent freeze. De Blasio did 3 rent freezes, correct? 0.
Yep.
And people can make the argument that whatever gains landlords did not make for whatever expenses they have, Mayor Adams has been, is it 11% in 4 years? Correct me if I'm wrong. In terms of the RGB.
Yeah, I'm trying to, I don't know the entire edition of it, but it's something like 10 or 11.
Right, 10 or 11. People can make the argument, hey, whatever losses landlords claim, you know, they incurred, or, you know, they didn't break even during de Blasio's 3-year rent freeze, they've more than made up. Going back to grandma with the fixed income, right? They've more than made up with an 11% over 4 years. What do you say to that person?
I say first, I
know people like you know who say,
yeah,
go ahead. I hope my mom pay her rent. Go ahead.
I wish it were that simple. And ironically enough, the RGB under Mayor Adams' administration has actually defunded rent stabilized housing more than de Blasio. And let me explain why.
Okay.
So despite the 10 or 11% increases that have come across his administration, we have been in the highest inflationary environment probably in recent history. All of these increases have come in under inflation, every single one, every single year. When you talk about the de Blasio administration's rent guidelines board freezing the rent, it's important to note that 2 of them were pre-2019. And that's important because this was before these laws had changed so tremendously. The rent guidelines board was not as important of a vote for most owners before 2019, because there were different avenues to make your building economically sound. There were ways you can get you can invest into an elevator or a boiler and recoup that money over 20 years or so through an MCI. IAIs had a much better amortization rate. Today, all of those avenues are mostly gone, including the vacancy bonus, which is a huge one. So you take that into account, those zeros were able to be absorbed because there were still ways you can recoup the costs that were coming into the building. On top of that, de Blasio did some of these freezes under some of the lowest inflationary environments. So you can almost even make the argument that those rent freezes were even justified, especially even in 2021. This was the COVID-19 pandemic. But a rent freeze today, post-2019, where the rent guidelines board adjustment is the only adjustment for revenue for these owners, the only source of revenue adjustment, on the backdrop of high inflation, on the backdrop of property taxes continuing to climb despite these buildings' values go down, on the backdrop of insurance almost doubling in some neighborhoods just in the past 4 years, it is night and day scenario. So we can't just simplify with a blunt number and say, well, yeah, 10% increase and 0% over there, this should be okay, especially when those numbers don't even reflect every single building. I tell everyone, a poor Manhattan rent stabilized building is entirely different from a 100% stabilized building in Grand Concourse on the Bronx. So there's a problem there inherently with the rent guidelines board, where they have to use this blunt instrument of one number, where they compile all this data and aggregate it and say, well, property owners' profits are so-called up 12%, even though that's not profit. It's a net operating income. That is the health of a building. But you're taking in these buildings in Manhattan who are flush with cash, who are charging rents that are $8,000 because they have 2 rent stabilized units in them, and you're bundling it with the Bronx, who has much lower rents and is almost 100% stabilized, and somehow saying, well, everyone's up 12%. And it's just, this is not good policy. It's not good math. And this is why we're ending where we are.
Okay, we're going to wrap this up soon. Last question. MIHZQA.
I'm sorry?
MIHZQA. Mandatory inclusionary housing and ZQA, right? Which is the equivalent thereof to build more housing for seniors. Thoughts on the policy and thoughts on increasing that number? I remember that passing of the de Blasio, but in terms of tools and mechanisms which will increase affordable housing, what are your thoughts on that policy?
Yeah, well, admittedly, not most well-versed in the depths of that policy, but what I'll say is that, as I said, right, again, affordable housing is subsidized housing. I do believe that you need inclusion of different incomes in neighborhoods for a fruitful neighborhood. I mean, I've seen this firsthand, and I think that's an important policy position to have. And government should do that. Government, when you don't have things happen sort of naturally occurring in your neighborhood, that's where government works best. If you want to see mixed income neighborhoods, you want to make sure we help out seniors as needed. And if you have the money to put forth to help that happen, then we should. And these are policies where government works best. But the reality is government does not have the capital scale nor capability to mandate and subsidize affordability in every single project. And that's why you need to incur the private market to build housing at all levels, at all income levels, at all parts of the city, scale it up, and then people will have the housing that they need.
Kenny, that's it. You've been more than generous with your time. Let's wrap this up, but just let's have a little fun. Best day on the job so far.
On this in this job.
Yeah, of course. Best day on the job that you said, man, I hit it out of the park. I hit for the cycle.
Best day on the job was my first day. The reality is it's still an uphill battle. We've got a lot of work to do, but it's still exciting, and I love every minute of it.
Worst day. You
Worst
said,
day.
man, did I make the right decision leaving the state assembly? This is tough. This is tough. This is hardball here.
The second day on the job was the worst day. When it's a big switch when you come from politics for so many years, and I've been entrusted to lead this industry and a large team and the trust of thousands of people whose entire either life savings or their families operations and entrusted with saving it can be overwhelming at times. But
yeah, best day on the job in the assembly.
Best day on the job in the assembly.
You served the state.
It wasn't even my bill, but I was really proud to help assist with it and obviously voted in favor of it. But when we passed the Clean Slate Act, I thought it was one of those really profound pieces of legislation that was well researched, that was well executed, that could change and will change, I think, millions of people's lives. For folks that don't know, just removing people's arrest records and misdemeanors and felonies after a given amount of time, and assuming they've not committed any other crimes. I think that gives people a real chance at just living a fulfilled life.
Toughest day in Albany.
Toughest day in Albany. One of the toughest days in Albany. Wow, I don't know why I'm so stumped here. I guess there's so many of them, right? But
no worries. Take your time.
My God, why am I so stuck here? I think every budget season that I had in my time, where they're always coming late, it's always tough in these budget negotiations where, as you said earlier, right, like government's about compromise. You're not gonna get the whole loaf of bread. And there were many times where we really had to compromise on some issues that we felt strongly about. Particularly, again, going back to criminal justice reform, housing policy, sometimes had to give into. So any delayed budget, any budget process can be extremely tough and taxing, but hopefully for the greater good.
Yeah, and you now you have a young family, so that's a tough thing,
Yeah.
Kenny, in that vein, what advice would you give 21-year-old Kenny Burgos?
21-year-old Kenny Burgos, I would say read a lot more. Sounds simple, right? But
it's very profound.
I think as a young staffer, I certainly absorb what was around me and talk to the people who are way smarter than me and continue to be. But I think I should have taken even more opportunity to just read the great work coming out. Some incredible journalists, books that speak on some of this policy, this books and stuff that I've probably read later into my career that have really transformed my thinking and how government works. I would have loved to have had that information earlier on.
Name the three most influential books you've read.
Well,
who you are.
It's
and how you view the world.
And everyone has it behind their office. No, everyone has it behind their office, and I don't right now. But I heard the audiobook of The Power Broker. That was an exceptional one. I think The Color of Law is an exceptional one. And I think not exactly government policy, but certainly from a psychological and just evolutionary standpoint, the book *Sapiens* by Harari, I think gives you a real insight just to we as humans and how we operate, and of course just how we've gotten here to construct this incredible metropolis that is New York City and this incredible government structure, and really gives insight to why we do things the way we do.
I read your op-ed on the Bronx is Burning. Have you read, ladies and gentlemen, The Bronx is Burning by Jonathan Mahler?
Admittedly, I have not. I should read it now. Put it on my list.
I highly recommend it.
Okay.
Kenny, and we're gonna wrap here. Mets, Yankees.
Neither. I can't name a pitcher. I'm the worst sports fan.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So you're agnostic.
I'm agnostic. That's the one conversation I can't have with people at a bar. I don't follow sports.
That's all right, Kenny. But you're into physical fitness. I know that.
I'm going to the gym. I'm going to the gym after this.
That's a sport.
My sport.
That's a sport. That is but that's a legitimate sport. We can. Kenny, anything you want to add that I forgot to mention? And again, I want to thank you because again, irregardless of where you stand on this conversation, it's a tough issue.
Oh yeah,
It's a tough issue.
and it will.
It's a thorny issue. I commend you for how you know, I mean, you're good on your feet. I see the videos. I know, you know, you care about the issue. But it's sort of like the David and Goliath thing. No matter how much, no matter how much you frame it or how much data you provide, right? People will always point to that senior on fixed income, right? So you have a tough job, man. You have a tough job, but you do it well. But hey, it's your platform. Anything you want to say that I didn't ask you that you want to mention? You got lost in the space.
I'll just say, first of all, thank you for having me on. I think it was an incredible conversation. And just, you know, I really hope that this came across in this conversation, right? Where like the work I do is with passion, it's with pure belief, it's centered with that grandmother in mind, right? Because I think there's programs and policies where government works best to help them. I just think we've made some poor policy choices, you know, trying to punish a select few and instead are punishing millions of tenants, quite honestly. And the future of New York City, particularly around stabilized housing, is one that I worry about every single day, and I have since before even taken this role. And so I think, you know, the housing crisis will define this era in New York City, and my only hope is that I can be even marginally influential in shaping it for the best.
Kenny, I appreciate you again, you know, for what you do. And again, how you served. You were distinguished in terms of the assembly. Again, you had big shoes to fill, a county leader, and you transitioned well between serving and filling the role, and then obviously the succession to the current assembly member, Emerita Torres, who's phenomenal as well.
Oh, so, she's so much smarter than me.
You left the place in good hands, and you left it better than you found it. So I commend you for that. And good luck in this job. Again, you will continue, right? Like all things, and improve and learn, and like we all, right? And
always a student.
I think exactly. That's what I respect about you. Always remain teachable. But Kenny, hopefully this won't be the last time we have this conversation, and all the best to you and your family, man. Talk soon.
Thank you. Same to you and your family. I'll see you soon.